the Google Workspace Directory. It's not an area of the admin console that gets that much attention, but we have had quite a few questions about it lately, about the best way of managing the directory for your staff and students, particularly around visibility settings. So today we thought it'd be useful to do a deep dive into that. Just a reminder, first of all, what the directory is for. So this is where your users can discover other users, groups, and shared contacts on your domain. And as the admin, you've got control of who can see what in terms of contacts on your domain. For users, the way they interact with the directory is either by going to contacts, so contacts.google.com, or if they're using Gmail or sharing an item in Drive or chat, then that's the other places where they can see the directory. And the directory will help surface information about that user. So at a minimum, it will show you the username and their email address, but it's also useful to add other custom fields as well. So things like departmental information, maybe the building we're working in, phone numbers for staff, and you can add your own fields as well. So as an example of that, if I jump over to my admin console over here, here I've got one of our example staff members in our Hogwarts school today, and down here, this is of course, the admin console view of what information we can complete for that user. So we've got employee type here listed as well. We've got a job title. We've got some departmental information. We've also extended the schema on our Workspace domain, so we've added in a couple of custom fields in here as well to capture the house and patrons. And if we go into the directory now, we can also see what this information looks like from the directory point of view. So let's go and find Professor McGonagall. Here we go, and we can see here we can see the house information, so that custom information. We can see the users' email addresses they've been assigned. So this user happens to have several email address aliases all listed here. We can even see their manager information here as well. So we've got that completed too. So let's now look at how to actually manage your directory in the admin console and some of the settings which is worthwhile looking at. So if we go into our admin console and go into directory and directory settings, what I always first look at is our sharing settings. So within sharing settings, it's always good to check what your external directory sharing is set to. I'd recommend setting this to just sharing authenticated user basic profile fields. And this just means that you're not oversharing information to external contacts about phone numbers, departmental information, other things you might have in your contact directory, which you don't want to be shared outside. So I'd set that to just for basic profile fields only to begin with. If we go back into directory settings, next, let's take a look at profile editing. I think it's a good idea to make sure that you're setting this profile information centrally. And the best way of doing that is either, as we saw just a moment ago, updating it in the admin console. But that's not very scalable. So when you've got a large number of users to update, then you could look at utilizing either Google Cloud Directory Sync and syncing that information from your local directory, or you could look at a system like ClassLink, which of course can sync that information from your student information system or your HR system. Or if you want to get a bit more technical, you could use Google's APIs to update that yourself, or you even use GAM as well. But when it comes to allowing users to edit their profile, you can control this by either domain-wide, OU, group, or individual users. What I'd normally recommend is some schools might want to allow staff to edit their information, or we might just want to allow staff to set their own profile picture, for instance, and update their pronouns like we saw earlier. Of course, we can also adjust this for our student users as well. And for students, I'd recommend limiting most of these fields and setting that information centrally. So for profile pictures, you could use GAM and push those profile pictures from your student information system and set those centrally. That's nice to do because then that means that when a teacher goes into Google Classroom, they can see all of their students' photos against their names, which is really useful at the start of the academic year. So that's profile editing. So you've got full control as an admin about what can be set there. Now, if we go into visibility settings, I think this is an area which doesn't often get explored. I think normally most schools would leave us to say that all users appear in a directory, which means anyone in your local directory can see anyone else. So students can see all staff, all other students, any groups you've created, and so on. But you can actually customize this using a custom directory in Google Workspace. So let's say for our students OU, that we only want to allow students to see just teachers and staff members, but not other students. So you can do this using a custom directory. So if we select this option, I can then go to create new. I can give my directory a name. So let's just call this staff. I've already got a group called all staff. And just to highlight here that the groups being added, it needs to be a standard Google group. Unfortunately, it's a real shame. It doesn't work with dynamic groups yet. Hopefully it will one day, but currently it only works with standard groups you've created either in the admin console or perhaps you've created using Google Cloud Directory Sync or GAM or Google's APIs. To keep those up to date. And once you've created your directory, oh, I need to re-authenticate, so let's try that again. It's been a couple of hours since I signed into my admin console. So let's try it again. So I'm going to set for students OU. I'm going to set this to use a custom directory. Go to create new. I don't think I just saved. So let's go to type in staff, look for our staff group, and select create. And now when I override this setting, once it's saved, it means that students can then only see staff members if they go to Google Contacts. And also if they're using autocomplete in apps like Gmail, Drive or Chat, then again, they will only see staff members. It still means they can still contact other students, but they'd need to know that student's email address in order to contact that user and type that in. So it's just a nice way of making the directory much cleaner for your students and yeah, making it a much better user experience. Of course, you could add in other groups as well. So maybe some schools we worked with maybe just want to have students see other students in their year group as well as our teachers. Again, you can do that. So you could customize that by expanding things further and then setting that information for different OUs. On the topic of OUs, this is where it comes in really useful to have a good OU structure for your school or schools. So generally what we recommend is taking a role-based approach. So at the top level, dividing it out by students, staff, admins or guests or suspended users. And then at the next level, then breaking it out by year group or staff roles. So whether that's teaching staff, support staff or admin. Now, if you have multiple schools in your domain, this is a type of OU structure we'd generally recommend. Again, starting with students, teachers, or guests at that very top level, then breaking it out by the school district, if you're working in a particularly large district, or school age range. So maybe dividing it out by secondary or primary there, and then dividing it by school and then year group. That just makes it much easier to set your policies and set up things like custom directories. So when it comes to policies, it means all your student policies you can set simultaneously for students across all schools on your domain. But then, of course, you can also customize the directory at the school level so that only users in that school, only students in that school can see other students or other teachers and not anyone else in other schools on your domain. So a nice way of controlling that a bit better. Okay, let's jump back into here. Have I missed any settings? If we go back to directory settings and have another look here, we also have a bit of control about whether shared contacts are visible, and also Google Groups. So by default, any groups you're creating on your Google Workspace domain are visible. We can actually change that default setting if we go into Apps, Google Workspace, and go into Groups for Business. That's down here. And then under our sharing settings, down the bottom here, we've got an option where we can actually hide newly created groups from the directory. So we can do that there. But what if you want to hide individual users, individual groups? Well, there's a couple of ways of doing this. So firstly, while we're on the topic of groups, the only way, well, the best way of doing that is actually using GAM. So there's a GAM command I can share in a moment, which enables you to hide groups from a directory, or show groups in the directory. If you're hiding by default and you want to show particular groups, you can do it that way. For users, you can either manage that individually. So if I look for my user on this domain, and if I go into my user information, directory sharing, and I can turn that off from here. Alternatively, we can do this using GAM as well, which enables you to then control this at scale. So here are some useful GAM commands which you can use for controlling visibility. So the first one here is to update a single user and turn the GAL, so the global address list, either on or off for that individual user. Of course, you could adapt that command to update an entire OU, or use a CSV file to update all users on a CSV there. You can also use GAM to get lists of users who, or if we look at this one here, to print the current address book of users, or you can use it to update all users on your domain who aren't suspended. So if you want to make sure that all users who are currently active in your domain are visible in a directory, then you could use a GAM command like that. And the one I mentioned earlier about updating groups, that's down the bottom here. So you could use this to update a single group and whether or not to include that in the directory. And of course, again, you can also adapt that GAM command to use a CSV file and bulk update all of your groups from there. I think that's all the slides I wanted to go through. There's one more here, actually, just to talk quickly about shared contacts. So these are external contacts, so email addresses external to your Google Workspace domain. Sometimes you might want to make a shared contact visible to everyone on your domain. Perhaps it's a supplier you regularly use, or you have another reason where you want an external email address to be visible to all users in your contact directory. Then this is a useful option. You can only do this using either the API, using GAM, or a app from the marketplace. There's a few out there which will manage this, or using Google Cloud Directory Sync. It's not actually possible to create shared contacts in the admin console, so only via the API. And one trick here I just wanted to mention, which sometimes comes up. So in the admin console, you've got some Gmail safety settings, which override all other settings in Gmail, and you can't actually allow list those domains which get caught by the safety settings. So one option here, which comes in useful sometimes, is if a message is being categorized as a spoofing email. Because of your Gmail safety settings, which let's just show you where they are. So if we go into Gmail and go into our safety settings, so these settings can't be overridden by allow lists in Gmail. The only way of trusting that would be to create a shared contact on your domain. So let's say there was an address which is getting caught as spoofing, then if you wanted to trust that, you could create that as a shared contact on your domain. So I'm showing the wrong tab. Here you go. These are the safety settings I'm referring to. So yeah, if that ever happens to you, then think shared contacts. That's a good way of overriding that. So just to quickly recap, I'd highly recommend looking at how your directory is currently configured. Now, checking your visibility settings, firstly. So checking to see who your users on your domain can see. Can they see everyone? Or are you customizing that to only particular groups of users? And also checking your profile editing settings. So just making sure that students don't have extra access to change their names and profile pictures, which you might not want your students doing. And also for staff, restricting some of that as well, because it's much better to ensure that it's set centrally, it's accurate then and synced from your own systems which you control, to create a nicely formatted directory to make sure it's much easier for users to find and contact one another. So I highly recommend checking how that is configured.